Hello and welcome to day 27 of revising UPSC previous year questions for UPSC 2027. In this video, I will cover GS2 of 2022, all the GS paper of 23, 24, 25 are already covered except the case studies of the ethics. So let's get started. The most significant achievement of modern law in India is the constitutionalization of environmental problems by the Supreme Court. Discuss this statement with the help of relevant case laws. The Supreme Court of India has elevated environmental protection from a statutory duty to a fundamental constitutional right. By expanding Article 21, the judiciary has integrated environmental jurisprudence into the core of constitutional democracy. Judicial constitutionalization of environmental problems. Right to a wholesome environment. In Subhash Kumar versus State of Bihar, 1991, the Supreme Court recognized the right to pollution-free air and water as an intrinsic part of the right to life under Article 21. Incorporation of environmental principles. Vellore Citizens Welfare Forum 96. Read the precautionary principle and polluter pays principle into environmental jurisprudence. MC Mehta versus Union of India, 1997. Established the absolute liability doctrine for hazardous industries. Public trust doctrine. In MC Mehta versus Kamal Nath, 97, the court ruled that the natural resources are held by the state in trust for the public. This is the flow diagram if you want. So, environmental right framework, Article 21, fundamental right to clean environment, Article 48, DPSP, mandate for state protection, Article 51A, fundamental duty of citizen to protect nature. Through judicial activism, the Supreme Court has constitutionalized environmental protection, aligning national law with Sustainable Development Goals 13 and 15. Question 2. Right of movement and residence throughout the territory of India are freely available to the citizens, but these rights are not absolute. Comment. Article 19(1)(d) and 19(1)(e) guarantee Indian citizens the fundamental right to move freely and reside anywhere within India, reinforcing national integration and unified citizenship. However, under Article 19(5), these rights are subjected to reasonable restrictions. Scope and constitutional restrictions. Protection of general public. Public health and safety. Restrictions imposed during healthcare emergency or communicable disease outbreak. State of UP versus Kaushalya, 1964 case. Public order and morality. Restrictions on the movement of habitual offenders, prostitutes or persons posing threats to national security. Protection of scheduled tribes. Cultural safeguard. Prohibiting non-tribal from freely residing or acquiring property in tribal belts under the 5th and 6th schedules to preserve indigenous identity, land and culture. Inner line permit. Regulating entry and residence in specific northeastern state. Example, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Mizoram. Movement and residence rights matrix. This is the flow diagram. Like Article 19(1)(d) and (e) guarantees free movement, residence and across territory of India. Article 19(5) restrictions general public interest, protection of scheduled tribes. Balancing personal liberty with reasonable restrictions preserves public order while upholding constitutional commitment to protect vulnerable indigenous community. To what extent, in your opinion, has the decentralization of power in India changed the governance landscape at the grassroots? The 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act 92 institutionalized a three-tier democratic system, transferring governance power from central and state capitals to grassroots, rural and urban local bodies. Transformative impact on grassroots governance. Democratic inclusiveness. Over 3.1 million elected representatives with constitutional reservation for women, 33% under Article 243D, SCs and STs, creating transformative social leadership. Bottom-up planning empowered Gram Sabhas Article 243A and District Planning Committee Article 243ZD to formulate localized development plans. Enhanced service delivery, accelerated implementation of welfare schemes like Magnerega, Jal Jeevan Mission, and PMAY at the village level. Persistent structural challenges, decentralization deficit, fund shortage, functions delays, functionary deficit. The financial dependency, local bodies generate less than 10% of their revenue, relying heavily on discretionary state grants, second ARC reports. Incomplete devolution, complete transfer of 29 subjects listed in the 11th schedule by state governments, dominance of Sarpanch-Pati dynamics. Realizing genuine grassroots democracy requires state governments to fully devolve the 3 Fs, funds, functions, functionaries, in line with Niti Aayog's recommendations. Question 4. Discuss the role of Vice President of India as the Chairman of Rajya Sabha. Again, a static question. Under Article 89(1) of the Constitution, the Vice President of India serves as the ex officio Chairman of the Rajya Sabha, acting as the presiding officer of the upper house of Parliament. Core role and functions as Chairman. Conduct of parliamentary business, enforces the rules of procedure of Rajya Sabha, maintains decorum, interprets constitutional provisions, and regulates debates, motions, and parliamentary questions. Neutral custodians of the House, casting vote, Article 100, exercises a vote only in case of an equality of votes, ensuring absolute political neutrality. Disqualification powers, adjudicates cases of member disqualification under 10th schedule anti-defection law. Protection of member privileges, safeguards the rights, privileges, and immunities of Rajya Sabha members under Article 105. Institutional coordination, represents the Council of States in joint parliamentary committees and international parliamentary forums. Chairman's core role, order and decorum, neutrality function, disqualification, and privileges. The Vice President's role as chairman ensures orderly parliamentary deliberations, protecting the federal balance and upholding legislative dignity. Discuss the role of the National Commission for Backward Classes in the wake of its transformation from a statutory body to a constitutional body. The 102nd Constitutional Amendment Act 2018 inserted Article 338B, transforming the National Commission for Backward Classes from a statutory entity established in 1993 into a full-fledged constitutional body. Enhanced role as a constitutional body. Expanded investigative mandate. Article 338B 5. Powers to inquire into specific complaints regarding the deprivation of rights and safeguards of socially and educationally backward classes. Civil Court powers. Article 338B 8 equips the NCBC with powers of a civil court to summon person, compel document production, and receive evidence under oath. Mandatory executive consultation. Article 338B9 requires union and state governments to consult the commissions on major policy matters affecting SEBCs. Identification Authority. Post 105th Constitutional Amendment Act 2021, NCBC evaluates central SEBC lists while preserving state powers to identify regional backward classes. NCBC structural evolution, statutory body 1993, constitutional body 102nd Amendment, Article 338B. Constitutional status empower the NCBC to safeguard backward class interest, driving inclusive development and fulfilling Article 15.4 and 16.4 mandates. Question 16. The Gati Shakti Yojana needs meticulous coordination between the government and the private sector to achieve the goal of connectivity. Discuss. PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan is a GIS-based digital platform integrating 16 central ministries to break departmental silos, streamline multimodal logistics, and reduce India's logistics cost from 13% to global benchmark, around 8% of GDP. Need for public-private coordination. Synchronized infrastructure planning. Private developers require access to real-time spatial data on utility lines and land availability to avoid cost overruns and construction delays. Capital mobilization PPP model. Achieving ambitious infrastructure targets demands private capital through model like hybrid annuity and INVITs supported by National Infrastructure Pipeline NIP framework. Last mile operational efficiency. While government provides trunk infrastructure, railways, expressways, private operators optimize multi-modal logistic parks, MMLPs, freight handling, and cold chain supply networks. Risk sharing and regulatory ease. Meticulous coordination via a unified portal speeds up statutory clearances, land acquisition, and environmental approvals, reducing investors' risk. PM Gati Shakti coordination matrix. Government role, private sector role. Special GIS mapping and approvals, trunk multimodal corridors, PPP investments, and MMLP and last mile logistics. Building a seamless multimodal connectivity network under PM Gati Shakti requires institutionalized dialogue, risk sharing, PPP frameworks, and transparent regulatory mechanism. Question 7. Rights. The Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016 remains only a legal document without intense sensitization of government functionaries and citizens regarding disability. Comment. The Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016 expanded recognized disability from 7 to 21, mandate accessibility standard, and increased reservation in public employment to 4%. Article 16(1). However, institutional and social apathy hinders its effective realization. Limitations of law without sensitization. Administrative inertia. Government functionaries often treat compliance such as building accessible ramps, accessible websites, or issuing UDID cards as a routine paper exercise rather than a fundamental right under Article 21. Public infrastructure deficit. Accessible India campaign. Sugamya Bharat Abhiyan faces execution lags due to a lack of empathetic urban planning among municipal engineers and public transport staff. Attitudinal barriers, deep-seated social stigma, systemic prejudice, and patronizing charity mindset perpetuate discrimination in education and workplace integration. Procedural bottlenecks, difficult disability certification, procedures, and unsensitized medical boards create hurdles for beneficiaries seeking welfare access. Disability barrier matrix, attitudinal stigma, administrative apathy, and physical barriers. Transforming. Actually, this is the main problem: social prejudice and charity mindset. But what we can do, transforming legal rights into lived dignity requires mandatory disability sensitization training for public servant, accessible urban audits, and sustained social awareness campaign. Question 8. Reforming the government delivery system through the DBT scheme is a progressive step, but it has its limitation too. Comment. DBT, powered by the JAM Trinity Jandan Aadhaar Mobile, has revolutionized welfare delivery in India by transferring subsidies directly into bank accounts. DBT has plugged leakage, eliminated ghost beneficiaries, and saved over 2.7 lakh crore. Progressive achievements. Fiscal efficiency and transparency bypasses corrupt intermediaries, ensuring targeted delivery under schemes like PM Kisan and Pahal. Financial inclusion and empowerment promotes banking habits, particularly among rural women, expanding formal financial accesses. Critical limitation and challenges. DBT delivery deficit, digital divide, exclusion error, market volatility, network gaps and low digital literacy, biometric mismatches and authentication failure to inflation dynamics, cash subsidy exposed, exclusion error, biometric authentication, failure servers, glitches, and Aadhaar seeding issues exclude vulnerable beneficiaries from food and welfare security. Second ARC concern. Last mile banking deficit. Inadequate rural bank branch ATM density forces beneficiary to spend significant time and money accessing their funds. Inflation and market distortion. Cash transfer instead of in-kind provision. Example, grain under PDS expose poor household to local market food price volatility. Optimizing welfare delivery demands, a hybrid model combining DBT with robust physical delivery options while strengthening rural banking point of sale infrastructure. Question 9. India is an age-old friend of Sri Lanka. Discuss India's role in the recent crisis in Sri Lanka in the light of the preceding statement. Rooted in deep civilizational, cultural, and geographic ties, India and Sri Lanka shares a time-tested bilateral partnerships. During Sri Lanka's severe economic crisis, 2022 and 23, India reinforced its role as the first responder under its neighborhood first policy and Sagar vision. India's role during the crisis: unprecedented financial assistance extended over $4 billion in financial support, including currency swaps, credit lines for essential food, fuel, and medicines, and debt deferrals. Diplomatic and multilateral advocacy championed Sri Lanka's case at the International Monetary Funds, becoming the first bilateral creditor to provide official debt restructuring assurance. Humanitarian and energy support delivered emergency medical shipments and diesel supplies to stabilize daily life and power grids. Long-term strategic investments focused on sustainable economic integration through renewable energy projects, Trin- Trincomalee oil tank farm, solar plants, and grid connectivity. This is the diagram. You can see Jaffna, Colombo, Trincomalee, 1, 2, 3, and from Rameshwar it is like this. Key highlights are these, and you can go through this. India's crisis response grid emergency relief, $4 billion plus $4 billion structural stabilization. India's assistance showcased its commitment to regional stability, deepening economic integration, maritime security, and resolving fishermen issues with further solidify this strategic friendship. Question 10. Do you think that BIMSTEC is a parallel organization like the SARC? What are the similarities and dissimilarities between the two? How are Indian foreign policy objectives realized by forming this new organization? BIMSTEC, Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, connects South and Southeast Asia. While both SARC and BIMSTEC promote regional integration, BIMSTEC is not merely a parallel entity to SARC. It serves as a functional alternative driven by geo-economic shifts. You can see the diagram. From New Delhi, they are connecting Kolkata. From Visakhapatnam, they are connecting Kolkata. And from Chennai also, they are connecting Kolkata. Means they are connecting Kolkata with 3 major cities of India. And thereafter, they are connecting Kolkata through Dhaka to Chatgaon. And that is a port, right? And thereafter, from Chatgaon, they are connecting it to Sidwe port. Or this is like via land route, and this is through sea. They can also connect like Chennai to Visakhapatnam by road, but it is a direct connectivity port to port from Kolkata to Chennai. Thereafter, from Chennai to Sri Lanka, that is Colombo, and from Chennai to the Sitwe port, that is Myanmar, and from Sitwe to Bangkok, Thailand. So this is the connectivity project, but these projects are still in the, let's move ahead. Don't say much. Because look, the problem is not with India, the problem is with this country, right? These are like highly unstable countries, and they are not even friendly as well. Bangladesh I am talking. Similarity and dissimilarities. Feature. Feature SAARC and BIMSTEC geographic core. South Asian landmass focus. Bay of Bengal littoral and contiguous region. Membership 8 nations includes Pakistan, 7 nations, bridges South and Southeast Asia. Bilateral dynamics stymied by Indo-Pak conflict. Consensus driven avoids major bilateral disputes. Strategic focus regional welfare and trade bloc. Maritime security, connectivity and trade bridge. Regional regional bridge framework. SAARC deficit. BIMSTEC capabilities. Realization of Indian foreign policy objectives. Bypassing SAARC stalemate provides a functional platform for regional integration free from Pakistani obstructionism. Synergy of Neighborhood First and Act East connects India's landlocked northeast with Thailand and Myanmar, unlocking regional trade corridors. Kaladan multimodal India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway. Bay of Bengal security strengthens maritime domain awareness, counter terrorism, and disaster response under India's Sagar vision, balancing expanding external influences in the Indian Ocean. BIMSTEC serves as a primary vehicle for India's regional integration, bridging South and Southeast Asia to promote collective security and shared prosperity. Question 11. Discuss the procedures to decide the disputes rising out of the election of a member of parliament or state legislature under the Representation of the People Act 1951. What are the grounds on which the election of any returned candidate may be declared void? What remedy is available to the aggrieved party against the decision? Refer to the case laws. The Representation of the People Act RPA 1951 enacted under Article 327 establishes a comprehensive statutory mechanism for resolving electoral disputes involving members of parliament, MPs and state legislature, MLAs, ensuring electoral integrity and democratic legitimacy. Procedures to decide election disputes. Filing of election petition. Section 80 and 81. Election disputes cannot be raised via ordinary civil suits. They must be raised exclusively through an election petition filed before the High Court within 45 days from the date of election declaration. Jurisdiction under Section 80A. The High Court exercises original jurisdiction. Trial procedures follow the Code of Civil Procedures 1908 with RPA requiring trial completion within 6 months. Section 86(6). Grounds to declare an election void. Section 100. Lack of qualification. The returned candidate was not qualified or was disqualified on the election date under the Constitution or RPA Act 1951. Corrupt practices. Commission of corrupt practices. Example: bribery, appealing to religious caste feelings, promoting enmity by the candidate or their election agent. Section 123. Improper acceptance, rejection. Improper rejection of any nomination or improper acceptance of a nomination that materially affects election outcomes. Non-compliance. Non-compliance with provision of the Constitution, RPA 1951, or statutory rules. RPA 1951 dispute adjudication architecture. High Court original jurisdiction, Supreme Court appellate jurisdiction. Within 45 days, statutory appeal. Grounds: corrupt practices, disqualification. Filed within 30 days. After this, okay, remedies available to aggrieved parties. Statutory appeal. Section 116A. An aggrieved party can file an appeal as of right to the Supreme Court within 30 days of the High Court's order. Stay order. Section 116B. The Supreme Court may grant a stay on the High Court's operation of the void declaration. Indira Nehru Gandhi versus Raj Narayan 1975. Constitutional remedy. Filing a special leave petition under Article 136. Strengthening High Court election benches and enforcing time-bound trial resolution will safeguard electoral purity, upholding constitutional trust and democratic accountability. Discuss the essential conditions for exercise of the legislative powers by the governor. Discuss the legality of re-promulgation of ordinances by the governor without placing them before the legislature. Article 213 of the Indian Constitution grants the governor ordinance making power an executive emergency power to enact temporary legislation when the state legislature is not in session. Essential conditions for exercising ordinance power. Recess of legislature. Either the single chamber or both houses of the state legislature must not be in session. Immediate action necessity. The governor must not be satisfied that the governor must be satisfied that circumstances exist requiring immediate legislative action. Aid and advice exercised strictly on the aid and advice of the State of Council of Ministers headed by the Chief Minister. Article 163. Coextensive scope. Ordinance subject matter must lie within the legislative competence of the state legislature, state and concurrent list, and cannot abridge fundamental rights. Maximum lifetime must be laid before the state legislature upon reassembly and ceases to operate 6 weeks from reassembly or either if or earlier if disapproved. Ordinance making checks and balances. This is the flow diagram. Legality of re-promulgation without legislative laying. Re-promulgating ordinances without placing them before the legislature bypasses democratic scrutiny, constituting a colorable exercise of power and a constitutional fraud. DC Wadhwa versus State of Bihar 1987, the Supreme Court held that re-promulgating ordinances repeatedly without placing them before the legislature is unconstitutional and a subversion of the democratic process. Krishna Kumar Singh versus State of Bihar 2017. The 7-judge bench ruled that re-promulgation is unconstitutional. Executive satisfaction under Article 213 is subject to full judicial review. Placing ordinances before the legislature is a mandatory constitutional requirement, not a directory procedure. Ordinances powers are meant for exceptional emergencies, upholding legislative supremacy over executive decree making. Preserves constitutional democracy and checks executive overreach. Question 13. While the national political parties in India favor centralization, the regional parties are in favor of state autonomy. Comment. India's party system reflects a dynamic interplay between national political parties operating on pan-Indian developmental, ideological and security platform, and regional parties rooted in localized socio-cultural, linguistic and territorial identities. National parties and centralization tendencies. Uniform governance vision. National parties often advocate centralized fiscal and administrative framework to ensure uniform policy implementation across states. Example, GST architecture, one nation, one election. National security and integration. Prioritize strong central authority to address cross-border threats, internal security challenges, and macroeconomic stability. Centralizing tools. Historical overuse of Article 356, deployment of central agencies, ED, CBI, and centrally sponsored schemes, CSS, reflects centralizing imperative. Federal power polarization. National parties, centralization, regional parties, state autonomy. Uniform macro policy, GST, CSS, pan-Indian integration policy, fiscal autonomy, and Article 356, cultural protection and decentralization. Regional parties and state autonomy push. Fiscal autonomy demand greater state shares in central tax pools, flexibility in utilizing funds, and removal of conditional CSS mandates. Socio-cultural assertions resist pursued cultural and linguistic homogenization, championing regional language protection and local reservation quotas. Institutional checks push for operational autonomy of the Governor's Office, operationalization of the Inner State Council, Article 263, and compliance with Sarkaria Commission recommendations. Synthesis, cooperative and bargaining federalism. Regional parties serve as structural checks against central overreach, forcing coalition governments to embrace federal accommodation. Conversely, national parties maintain structural coherence against sub-regional fragmentation, balancing national integrity with regional aspirations requires strengthening institutional platform like the Niti Aayog, Governing Council and Interstate Council advancing cooperative federalism. Question 14. Critically examine the procedures through which the President of India and France are elected. While India and France are constitutional democracy, India functions as a parliamentary republic with a ceremonial head of state, whereas France operates under a semi-presidential system with an executive president possessing substantial administrative powers. See, in 22 they are asking France. In 23 they asked uh, UK. In 24-25 they asked USA. Like I'm talking about the comparison. So election procedure, India versus France. Indian President Indirect Electoral College. Electoral College composition. Article 54. Elected indirectly by an electoral college comprising elected members of both houses of parliament, member of MPs, that is MPs, and elected members of legislative assemblies, MLAs, including Delhi and Puducherry. Voting mechanism. Article 55. Conducted via proportional representation by means of single transferable vote with secret ballot. Value of votes is calibrated to ensure parity among states and uniformity between parliament and assemblies based on population formulas. French president, direct universal suffrage, direct election, uh, elected directly by citizens of the French Republic through universal adult suffrage under a two-round majority runoff system. Two-round mechanism if no candidate secures an absolute majority more than 50% in the first round, a second runoff election is held 2 weeks later between the top two vote getters. Presidential election comparison: India indirect parliamentary model, France direct two-round runoff. Electoral college: MPs plus MLAs, single transferable vote, ceremonial executive mandate. Universal adult suffrage, absolute majority threshold, direct executive mandate. Critical comparative analysis. Dimensions: Indian president, French president. Democratic mandate. Indirect mandate reflects federal consensus. Direct national mandate is strong personal legitimacy. Federal representation integrates states directly into voting value. Unitary structure, states have no distinct weight. Political neutrality, positioned above party politics. Active political leader driving executive agenda. India's indirect election model safeguards federal harmony and parliamentary supremacy, whereas France's direct runoff system provides strong democratic legitimacy tailored for a semi-presidential executive. Question 15. Discuss the role of the Election Commission of India in the light of the evolution of the Model Code of Conduct. The Model Code of Conduct (MCC) is a set of non-statutory guidelines issued by the Election Commission of India under Article 324 to regulate political parties and candidates during elections, ensuring free, fair, and competitive electoral contest. Evolution of the Model Code of Conduct. Origins 1960-62, introduced during Kerala Assembly elections in 1960, codified and distributed to political parties during the 1962 general elections. Consolidation and enforcement 1990s under Chief Election Commissioner T.N. Seshan, the MCC evolved into an operational regulatory instrument strictly enforcing campaign limits and executive conduct bans. Modern expansion update to address updated to address social media, digital campaigning, fake news and paid news issues through specific guidelines. Role of the ECI in enforcing MCC. Level playing field prevents ruling parties from misusing official machinery, government transport, or issuing last minute welfare announcement to influence voters once elections are announced. preventing hate speech and hate campaigns, regulates campaign rhetoric, prohibiting appeals to caste, religion, or communal feelings under moral and administrative sanctions, monitoring election expenditure, tracks political rallies, media advertisements, and campaign expenses to curb money power, technology-driven enforcement, introduced the C-Vigil app, enabling citizens to report MCC violation in real time with photo location tags requiring response within 100 minutes. Despite lacking statutory backing, the MCC derives moral and administrative authority from Article 324, giving statutory teeth to the select MCC provision as recommended by parliamentary standing committees, can further strengthen electoral integrity. Question 16. Beside the welfare scheme, India needs deft management of inflation and unemployment to serve the poor and the underprivileged section of the society. Discuss. While targeted welfare schemes, example PDS, Magnarega, PM Kisan, provide vital safety nets, their long-term efficacy is constantly eroded by macroeconomic instability. Serving the vulnerable requires managing inflation, a tax on the poor, and generating productive employment to ensure sustainable poverty reduction and social justice. SDG 1 and SDG 8. Impact of unmanaged inflation and unemployment on the vulnerable erosion. On the vulnerable, erosion of real purchasing power. Food inflation severely impacts low-income households, which spend over 50% of their earnings on food, neutralizing direct cash transfer. Depletion of household assets. Persisting structural unemployment forces low-income families into informal, precarious labor, leading to household debt traps and reduced spending on health and education. Limitation of standalone welfare. Welfare transfers. Welfare transfers mitigate distress temporarily but cannot substitute for stable wage earning or sustainable livelihood creation. Socioeconomic distortion loop. High inflation, eroded real wages, informal employment, poverty entrenchment. Debt management strategies required. Inflation management, monetary stability, maintaining RBI's flexible inflation targets framework 4% to 2% while managing supply risk, supply side shocks. Supply chain infrastructure, expanding cold chain storage, buffer stocking, and removing market bottlenecks under Operation Greens to curb perishable food price volatility. Unemployment management, labor-intensive industrialization, boosting manufacturing capabilities through PLI schemes targeted at MSMEs, textiles, and construction to absorb rural surplus labor. Skill integration, aligning Skill India initiative with modern industrial demand to resolve structural skill mismatches. Combining targeted welfare protection with macroeconomic stability through effective inflation control and job creation will empower vulnerable communities, advancing sustainable socio-economic development. Question 17. Do you agree with the view that increasing dependence on donor agencies for development reduces the importance of community participation in the development process? Justify the answer. The shift toward donor-driven development model managed by international financial institutions, global philanthropic foundations, and large NGOs has injected capital and technical expertise into local development. However, excessive dependence on donor agencies risk displacement community-led participatory developments. Arguments supporting the view: donor over dependence distorts local agency. Top-down priority setting. Donor agency often imposes rigid, preconditioned agendas aligned with external metrics rather than localized grassroots priorities. Second ARC concern: erosions of local ownership. Heavy reliance on external funding reduces community initiative, fostering a passive beneficiary mindset instead of active democratic engagement. Gram Sabha empowerment under Article 243A. Bureaucratization of NGOs, non-local profit risk shifting accountability upward toward donor reporting frameworks rather than downward towards community citizens. Sustainability deficit. Projects often collapse once donor funding cycles conclude due to a lack of local capacity building and community stewardship. Development approach paradox, donor driven top down model, community led bottom up model, local needs and ownership, sustainable asset stewardship, preset external priorities, high capital, low local rootedness. Counter perspective, harmonizing donor resources with community action. When structured effectively, donor agencies enhance community participation by providing technical tools, seed capital, and institutional capacity building. Example, self-help groups, federation under Kudumbisri or Seva. To ensure democratic sustainable growth, donor agency must transition from top-down managers to catalytic facilitators anchoring resource allocation in bottom up gram sabha development plans. Question 18. The Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act 2009 remains inadequate in promoting incentive-based system for children education without generating awareness about the importance of schooling. Analyze. The Right to Education RTE Act 2009 operationalized Article 21A, making education a fundamental right for children aged 6 to 14. While the Act successfully expanded school infrastructure and enrollment rates 98%, converting physical access into meaningful learning outcomes requires pairing legal entitlements with social awareness and incentive-based behavioral change. The structural strength of the RTE Act. Universal access and infrastructure, mandated pupil teacher ratios, school infrastructure norms, schedule standard, and 25% quota reservation in private schools for underprivileged children. Section 12(1)(c). Entitlement inclusions. Provided free uniforms, textbook, and integrated midday meals, PM Poshak, as structural incentives. Educational transformation matrix. RT legal entitlement, supply, community awareness, demand, free tuition fee and infrastructure, midday meals at 25% quota, value of schooling and retention, parental engagement and learning focus, limitations. The need for awareness and incentives. Rote enrollment versus real retention. In the absence of community awareness regarding foundational literacy and numeracy, FLN, families in economically distressed region pull children out for seasonal migratory labor. Passive school management committees. Section 21 mandates SMCs comprising parents to oversee school functioning. However, low parental awareness renders these bodies underutilized. Shift to learning outcomes. Simple physical attendance incentives fail to address learning poverty. NASASER data, as per that, unless parents actively demands quality education. Gender-specific barriers. Awareness campaigns are essential to address safety concern, menstrual hygiene stigma, and domestic care burdens that cause female dropouts rates in higher grades. Achieving the goal of the National Education Policy 2020 requires pairing the legal framework of the RTE Act with community awareness campaigns, empowering parents as active partners in quality education. Question 19. How will I2U2, India, Israel, USA, and UAE grouping transform India's position in global politics? The I2U2 grouping, comprising India, Israel, UAE, and USA, often termed the West Asian Quad, represents a pragmatic geo-economic partnership focusing on joint investments in water, energy, transportation, space, health, and food security. Strategic transformation of India's position in global politics, geo-economic leadership, and West Asian integration. Bridging regional divides capitalizes on the historic Abraham Accord, enabling India to deepen ties with both Arab nations and Israel simultaneously without diplomatic balancing acts. Food and energy security hub. UAE 2 billion investment to develop integrated food parks across India, leveraging Israel's agricultural tech and US private capital position India as a key food security anchor for the global south. This is the diagram, right? Israel, USA, India, and UAE. You can go through this. Although these kind of groupings will not gonna work unless and until you are holding a strong position. I mean, India is holding a strong position, but we are still more of a market driven, right? People are getting friends with us because of the Indian market. But unless and until we are not equivalent to these, okay, we are better than UAE. Now people might say the infrastructure and all. So man, you need to understand the population. There is no comparison of the population plus the rules. India is a lenient country. You want this kind of facility and everything, but you do not want this kind of rules in our country. So that is not things goes, right? So anyway, but unless and until you will not get strong, this kind of groups will not gonna work. Strategic synergy and countering rival influence. Synergy with IMEEC corridor complements the India Middle East Europe economic corridor, positioning India as a primary trade and logistics bridge connecting South Asia, West Asia, and Europe, balancing regional influence. Offers an alternative development model to state-led infrastructure initiative in West Asia and the Indian Ocean region. I2U2 strategic capabilities. US high capital tech, Israel tech innovation, UAE capital and energy. India execution hub and huge market. The multi-alignment and global south voice demonstrates India's shift towards out demonstrates India's shift toward outcome-focused multi-alignment, building issue-based coalition to safeguard national interest while representing global south priorities. I2U2 elevates India's role from a regional actor to a pivotal geo-economic leader, driving security, innovation, and economic integration across West Asia and the Indo-Pacific. Question 20. Clean energy is the order of the day. Describe briefly India's changing policy towards climate change in various international fora in context of geopolitics. India's climate policy has evolved from a defensive posture focused on historic emission liabilities to a proactive leadership driven commitment to clean energy and climate justice, positioning the nation as a key architecture as a key architect of global green transmission. Evolution of India's climate leadership across international fora. From defensive rights to proactive climate leadership. COP26 and Panchamrit commitments announced targets at Glasgow, including achieving 500 gigawatt non-fossil capacity by 2030, meeting 50% energy requirements from renewables and targeting net zero by 2070. G20 Presidency, Green Development Pact, championed climate finance, triple renewable energy capacity goals, and green hydrogen framework, prioritizing global south concern. Architect of Global Clean Energy Alliance. International Solar Alliance, ISA co-founded with France, institutionalizing solar energy deployment across developing economies. One Sun, One World, One Grid. Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI, and Mission Life shifted focus towards climate resilient infrastructure and individual behavioral shifts, lifestyle for environment. India's climate policy trajectory, defensive posture, Kyoto era, proactive leadership, Paris Agreement. Global Green Architect, Panchamrit, ISA, G20 Green Pact. So this is the diagram you can see, and go through this diagram, you will know. Like Kyoto era, what are the points? Paris, COP26, G20 presidency. The geopolitical context and clean energy realities. Energy sovereignty, transitioning from fossil fuel imports toward Green hydrogen and solar energy reduces trade deficit and vulnerability to global fuel price shocks. Global supply chain diversification. Positioned as a global manufacturing hub for solar PVs, green hydrogen and EV technologies offering a reliable supply chain alternative. Advocating common but differentiated responsibility consistently holds developed nation accountable for climate finance 100 billion per dollar, sorry, $100 billion per year and technology transfer. India's evolving climate strategy balances domestic development priorities with global clean energy leadership, demonstrating that economic growth and environmental stewardship can advance together.